Hello and good evening. How are you? It's good to be among you today. For those that do not know me, my name is Basil Smikle. I'm the director of the public policy program here at the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute. It is a pleasure to welcome you here today. Is this anyone's? Is that mine? That is not mine. Gotta check. Is this anyone's first time here? It's a lot of you. Welcome to the former home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, and Sarah, actually, his mother, as many of you know already, and for those who have not been here before. This was the Roosevelt's home from when he was married until he became President of the United States. So on that second floor, which many of you hopefully have gotten a chance to see, his library on the second floor. In the time between November of the election and March, when presidents were inaugurated in those days, he crafted what would become the New Deal. So we like to say that big things and big ideas happen in this building, and so we thank you so much for joining us today. This is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful event that I'm looking forward to, and welcome to Phil Bertelsen, the director of 761 Tank Battalion, the original Black Panthers. It's good to see you. We're here in the closing week or so of Black History Month to really take in, and I hope you do, an amazing history, an amazing documentary that really left me so inspired. And because of his work, I think we'll all be a little smarter as we leave here today. But before we go any further, just a couple of housekeeping items. The first is that Phil and I will have a conversation after this film. I'll ask a couple of questions. I got actually more than a couple, but I'll just ask a couple so that you all have an opportunity to ask some questions as well. So there'll be some opportunity to get some mics passed around so we can have a collective conversation. But before we do all of that, I want to thank Harold Holzer, who is the director of this fine institute, who could not be here today. I want to also thank our AV team, including Danny, who's there, Monica, who's there, all of our event folks, and Mac, who helped put this together. Thank you so much, sir, for your leadership. And I also want to thank, and would be remiss if I did not, all the good people at the History Channel. Are y'all here today at the History Channel? The History Channel, hey. Don't be shy, stand up, you just, she's just in marketing, ladies and gentlemen, but she represents a network, an organization that is the holder and the keeper of the collective wisdom of our past. See how I did that? So you are no longer just in marketing. Just be clear about that. But thank you please take this back to the folks at the History Channel, that we truly appreciate their support and leadership. I was grateful to interact with a number of them when I gave commentary on a documentary on FDR that aired in May, and had a wonderful experience. So thank you so much for your leadership. Please pass that along to your colleagues, that we really and truly support them. So without further ado, and I know many of you were able to take advantage of our reception upstairs, so thank you so much for just being a part of what Roosevelt House does. So again, but without further ado, we will get this documentary started. Please listen, look with open ears and open hearts. It's a fantastic piece, and we'll be back to talk about it at the end. You opened with Saving Private Ryan. I'm reminded that there are, Hollywood tells these stories. We know a lot about the Tuskegee Airmen. There was a movie called Fury. That was Brad Pitt, the tank.
That's right.
Tank Battalion.
That's it, yeah.
Inglourious Bastards, other, different kind, right? But we're used to seeing these Hollywood images of these heroic individuals. One of the things that always strikes me when I look at photos such as the ones that you put in the documentary is that these are just young men.
Yes.
They're so young.
Yeah.
They're not the movie star. They're just young men who are off to war, want to do the right thing, And it's amazing to hear the voices of their relatives, their descendants, talking about their heroism. Um, tell tell us about interviewing the family members, and we saw one get choked up because there's a lot that she's recalling.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the things that I've told a few historical stories and have learned that the more I learn about history, the more I realize it's still with us, uh, and that the past is prologue, right?
Yep.
And so I like to try, if I can't get a living witness, in this case we got one of the last two remaining Tank Battalion survivors, then talk to those whose lives were impacted by them. And so the descendants were the ones that we reached out to. And we were surprised at how little they knew in some cases. That family sitting around the table with Robert Andre heard things for the first time in that conversation with Morgan. So, memory of trauma is selective,
Right.
But it would just put us that much closer to the actual events. And I think they felt gratified that they could be a part of the story. And they all bought memorabilia and memories, and so it just makes it much more personal.
There's a part of and remember, we will get to your question shortly. We want to make sure we hear from all of you. But one of the there's a part where early on where we hear these young African American men going into training in the South because it was important that they were, policed, I think was the word, by these Southern sergeants. And I'm reminded of also the sort of origins of policing in the South.
That's
right?
right.
And I just couldn't help but draw that connection. And it's amazing how even as individuals going off to fight for their country, there was still this emphasis on both suppression and segregation.
Yes. And Jim Crow was alive and well at that time and in the military. It wouldn't be until after the Second World War that the armed forces were desegregated. FDR desegregated war industries so that they could make the munitions and make the tanks and really gear up for the battle, but the troops were still very much segregated. And this was really the kind of, ignition toward desegregation and the civil rights movement that followed, because these men had gone off to war and, given their blood and their treasure and come back to realize that nothing had changed. And
Right.
so, this idea that they had a purchase on democracy and the American institution, as it were, was going to be made real, and that's what happened.
Yeah, I want to pivot a little bit from that, a piggyback, I should say, on that, because there's this recurring theme throughout the film about what it means to be a patriot, and that you had these African American men going through everything they're going through, and even in this segregated experience, saying, "No, we want to fight for our country." And it occurs to me that there's this interest and emphasis on trying to claim or reclaim the narrative of what it means to be a citizen and a patriot in this country.
No, exactly. And I think that's one of the more painful kind of recognitions of when you study. And for me, I have done stories around the wars, whether it's the Civil War, or the Revolutionary War, World War II, and World War I, but never about the war. And it really just hit differently, to see these men go off to war, to suffer, what they endured, and to see the courage and valor in which they performed it, to only realize that they came home to, the same kind of second-class citizenship, really, and kind of broke my heart. So, this idea of what and who is a patriot and what makes a patriot in this country has been contorted, to say the least. But it bears, it goes without question that anyone who has served is by far the most patriotic.
One great moment is Secretary Austin saying, "Welcome to the Pentagon,"
Right.
to Morgan Freeman.
Yeah.
How does he, I mean, to the extent that you could say, and based on those conversations, How does he view himself in this lineage, this incredible lineage?
Oh, very much. I mean, when we reached out to him kind of on a lark, knowing that he was the first black Secretary of Defense, his office immediately responded, and they were trying to find a way to be a part of this conversation. His only request was that Morgan be the one to interview him.
Oh, because who wouldn't want the voice of
Right.
God to interview?
Well, the thing about it, and I like to take notice of Justin Irvin, who shot this movie. He was there in the Pentagon and can bear witness to the fact that they all stood at attention when Morgan came through. It was something to behold. They were waiting in line to receive him, dressed in uniform. I have a newfound and profound respect for our armed forces after watching that display. And they've stayed committed to this project, and that document dump that we offered Morgan at the end about his uncle, in large part had to do with the support of the Department of Defense.
And and just as actually to sort of commend you on that, because one of the things that I think we appreciate, but perhaps don't appreciate as much as we should, is the amount of research that has to go into telling a story like this, right?
Yeah, we were uncovering some things as we went along and trying to shoot it, edit it, and catch up to it all at the same time. Little known story is Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, his stepfather is a Holocaust survivor, and also was rescued, if you will, by the 761st Tank Battalion.
Oh, wow.
And we tried to get him, but we couldn't get two secretaries in one. So we did the best
You gotta take your pick,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Love to go out to questions. There's a microphone, two microphones going around. We're happy to get one to you. There are quite a few. There's one right behind you over your right shoulder, Mac. And it will come forward.
Thank you very much for the wonderful film. I have two questions. One, what became of Jackie Robinson's court-martial? And secondly, were the commanders of the battalion always a white male, or did there ever come a point where there became a black commander?
That's a great question. I'll start with the second one first. Jackie was actually going to be a captain. He went to officer candidate school, and that was why he was with the 761st. So they were working on kind of rotating out the white commanding structure at the time. But as far as whatever came of him, he won his court-martial, represented himself. Wish could told the story about all of that. But the long story short is that he mustered out because he had an injury. He had bone spurs. He went on to be the fastest man in baseball with bone spurs in his feet. Not good enough to go overseas, but changed world history in another way. So that's what
And we know some people use
Yeah,
bone spurs
right?
differently.
Exactly. Exactly.
Apparently some gold sneakers you could buy. No, but I'm sorry.
That helped with bone spurs?
Some January 6s that apparently are on sale right now. There's sorry?
There were some, ultimately, in fact, the black captain was responsible for the commendation that got written up that Patton signed off on, but ultimately got buried. So, yes, I mean, toward the end of their time, some black military leaders had moved into position.
Right there, sir. And you have a microphone for you.
Hi. My name is Rao. I'm an immigrant. I'm pondering, is there a connection between this original Black Panthers, 761, and the Black Panther movement? And I'm also wondering, there are parallel stories with Asian Americans, Chinese, never been recorded in the history. They built the railroad. I'm also asking, because sometimes I have black professors, I lived in Georgia. So I'm wondering if black people have accomplished that kind of equal status. I don't know, I have been living in New York for 25 years, but I still feel like, they're still treated as second rate, So what do you think?
Well, thank you for your question, Raul. I mean,
Yes.
the struggle continues, as they say, for sure. So yeah, no, we're still making progress. Poco y poco.
Here, and then we'll come to you.
So, great film. Can you hear me all right?
Phil,
Hi.
hi.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
We share a name and a
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
Old friend of mine.
So I have a question sort of about the scope of the film and this, coming back to this idea of definitions of patriotism, because I was thinking at the beginning that black people fought in the Revolutionary War, but they fought for the other side. They fought for their own freedom. And then I think we saw a tiny little clip of Muhammad Ali, who also sacrificed a lot, but not in exactly the same way. And I'm wondering whether that was a conversation and what this format kind of allows. And, that's my question.
Well, that's a great question, and it is true. I mean, black people have been fighting for their freedom ever since they've been enslaved here on these shores. I'm not sure about the clip of Ali, but interestingly enough, Jackie Robinson, before he was in the 761st, was in the cavalry, as we show in the film, and he served alongside Joe Louis. So just imagine for a moment those two men on horses in uniform. But the idea that black people have been fighting for their freedom and thought that, if they would go to war and shed their blood, that they would somehow, be recognized as full citizens, to your point, Raul, never really came to pass. And so, I mean, that's just the reality of it. But the scope of the film, required that we stay as close to the war and the 761st as we could. Couldn't really go.
And I just,
that.
as you're getting go ahead. As you're getting the microphone, it always occurs to me how these are young men going off to war, fighting for their country, and then come back home and segregated society,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's just how painful that must be.
Yeah, I mean, the story of Isaac Woodard is the most emblematic of that. Yeah.
Yep. Sir?
Thank you, Phil, for the film and the work you guys do. My name is Jim Dingman. I covered this for 2 years. I interviewed, I have actually half the papers of Colonel Bates.
Oh, really?
They were donated to me, and I interviewed all these people 30 years ago when they were a lot younger. So as far as I'm concerned, you corrected the problems that occurred with the Liberator film,
Yes.
which again, I think it's very important. But it shows you all these stories that one can explore. Up there, you talked about you had a little clip there where you had the 761st being shown in the Pentagon, along with the individual replacement program that occurred after 1944, after the Battle of the Bulge. And at the time of the controversy of the movie Liberators, I interviewed a guy up at Wesleyan who was doing a book about all the individual infantry replacements who were sent after they had run out of infantrymen to fight in these units.
Yeah.
And so there's all these stories that remain to be told.
Yeah.
And I thank you for correcting the problems of Liberators, because I spent 2 years fighting with public television about that film.
Yeah.
But I had the great privilege to interview all these guys, and I taped them. Too bad I didn't know you back then, because I had tapes of all these people talking. E.G. McConnell was a great buddy of mine, and it's a great privilege to see the film.
Oh, thank you for that. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. The film he's
a-
talking about was a film called The Liberators, which was in large part focused on the 761st, but mischaracterized their role in liberating concentration camps, and consequently, the 761st kind of got buried, and their story got buried, and the filmmakers made some errors, factual errors, but we went to great lengths.
Public television and the CPB
Yeah.
to take funding away from the National Endowment of the Humanities. That's how crazy it got down there.
No. So
Yeah.
we got two quick here. I know there's one here, one there. I got you.
Well, actually, I also wanted to say that, by the way, as far as young men goes, they did not look like young men.
No, they were no
After-
longer by the
after
time.
a few
by
days
the
of
time,
combat.
yeah.
Many of those men who you saw in archive, you know, had been interviewed previously for work around the 761st. So I didn't get a chance to meet any of them except for Robert Andry, who you saw with his family, and Morgan.
And I wanted to ask, because Patton did have a reputation for being extremely racist, virulently, I would say, and how they felt about that, even though he, you know, in other words, he was saying, basically said, you have to prove yourselves for that. So I was wondering how some of these veterans really felt about being first assigned and then serving under Patton based on that. And also, as far as the concentration camps, that controversy, because we know that African-American soldiers liberated Mauthausen and a lot of the subcamps of Buchenwald.
Correct.
Elie Wiesel was one person who was fighting to say he was liberated by African-American soldiers. So I was wondering how, you know, especially after the liberators, how the 761 actually, the veterans, and the veterans organization actually dealt with that and pursued that.
Right. That's a difficult. To your first question, I didn't speak firsthand to any of the men about Patton. I mean, they had a kind of, you heard the testimony, which I found in archives, so they had a certain reverence for him. And, you know, they set out to prove him wrong. And he gave him the opportunity, and the truth is, you know, he had no other choice. He was running out of men, and they running out of tankers, and it was like, yeah, I guess this is, you know, a last-ditch effort, which ended up being a great one. But to your point about the liberation of these camps, you know, we go to lengths in the film to talk about them as a bastard battalion, which meant they got moved around to different infantry groups. The infantry groups get credit for liberating the camps, but the tank battalion, not so much, because they got spread out, you know, and so in some ways, they didn't even know who was in the tanks, you know, so it's the fog of war, it's, you know, erasure of history, it's a whole lot of things that go into them not getting credit, and we went to great lengths to demonstrate that they were actually at Mauthausen against, you know, the wishes of some historians who prove it, and so we did, yeah.
And the liberated, the people who were liberated,
Yes.
did their testimony
Yes.
help?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, if you're liberated and you're in that situation, you remember that first face you see. And if that face is like none of the others, you don't forget it. Yeah, yeah. And the Shoah Foundation has done great work to document that, and that's where we found Floyd's testimony, actually.
If I can just answer a small part of your question about their feelings for Patton. It actually made me think of two conversations I had with two Tuskegee Airmen. And they would never not acknowledge the racism existed. But they would always come back, we're soldiers, do our job. We're gonna do it twice as well, right? Which you heard in the film. They would always make sure that they showed up and did their job twice as well, worked twice as hard, because they know they needed to do that. But part of they were soldiers part was also going back to our earlier comment about wanting to be a patriot and wanting that full citizenship.
And it's the chain of command. You know, they always stayed respectful of that.
Did you have a question, sir?
I was amazed that there's two segregated units fighting. The 444th 100 Battalion, which got 11 presidential citations, but it seems that the racism against the 761st never got any recognition as a unit. The difference, I think, is a lot of Southern officers in the major ranks in the military at that time.
Yeah, I mean, we found evidence of the citation being promoted. Even Patton signed off on it, but it got buried completely until it wasn't. And it took the first black Secretary of the Army, Clifford Alexander, to actually, under President Carter, to make that happen.
There was a question over here. Is it? Okay.
Hey.
Hi.
I just was wondering, how long has it taken for people to feel like, for African American people to feel like they have been recognized? I mean, in real time, as it were.
In the
Yeah.
military,
Yes.
I think it's an ongoing, struggle. The gentleman in the film, D. Wayne Robinson, he actually was not a descendant of the 761st, but a recent veteran himself who fought in Iraq, Afghanistan. They did tours of duty that we all know. And he knew nothing about the 761st, which is why he became so passionate. And he said to me, prior to knowing who they were, my closest thing to a hero in a time of strife was a runaway slave. The military had taught him nothing about the legacy of this battalion and others like him. And so for them, it's an ongoing effort to kind of bring recognition to those that came before them so that they can fight with that courage and that memory.
Because even now, there's a program on Apple TV, right? Masters of the Air. All of that is white.
Mostly, I think I'm waiting. I'm only halfway through it. I'm told there's some black soldiers in there, but yeah, at that time it was segregated military. What can I tell you?
I'll come back. Yes. And I'll come forward.
As a documentarian and,
Kobe
and a storyteller,
That's
my question to you is, what was your inspiration to tell this story and origin for you personally to tell this story?
Well, thank you for the question, Kobe. This particular story, my inspiration was Morgan Freeman, and the opportunity to tell a story that he wanted to tell. But I had been and have been long telling stories of historical importance, and so it's become something of a duty and in a way for me to tell these largely undertold, if not untold, stories about our history, and hopes that we can go from there and not have to relive the past with the same blindness.
Microphone's coming.
Thank you. First, great job.
Hey, man, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Really well shot. Beautiful as well.
Justin Irvin, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, really.
Mr. Irvin, we call him.
That was kind of my question as well, but could you walk us, I guess two questions. Could you walk us through the timeline? Like, you said you were inspired by Morgan Freeman. What year was that? What was the process like of making the film? And then my second question is, are there any aspects of the story that did not make it to the final cut?
Yeah, lots. I'll start with the last question first. So Warren Creasy, whose daughter you see here, was known as the baddest mother in the 761st, and we had a whole sequence. And Morgan loved it. Now this guy just, ate Nazis for lunch. He was a real. They call him a homicidal guy because he saw his friend get killed, and he made it through the war, and lived to tell the tale. Yeah, and stood at Nuremberg as a military MP, overseeing that justice. So, great story, but it was hard to tuck it in, and you got to make room for things that. Yeah. So anyway, that was the biggest loss, I think. As far as the timeline goes, Morgan's been living with this desire since Saving Private Ryan. He tells a story of going to see the premiere, and the next day he goes into the office and get Steven on his phone. Steven, I loved your movie, but I didn't see me. True story. And so they actually collaborate and create a scripted version of this, and we're set to make it at Paramount. But then another film called Red Tails happened to be on the slate, and they're like, we already got our black World War II movies, so that one never got done. But that's
Only one at a time, huh?
one at a
One at a
time.
time. There's
Hey,
a-
look, we get 28 days, 29.
That's right.
It's leap year, right?
That's right. There's a question in the back. Did you have a question, ma'am? Or did I see? Right here.
I was interested to know if you learned anything more about Eisenhower by making this film, because he has a very poor record of supporting civil rights as president, and I wanted to know where he stood in terms of integrating the military and in dealing with the black troops.
Well, you know, what I did learn about Eisenhower was that he sanctioned black journalists to be embedded in these segregated units, and that's how we got to know Trezvant Anderson. And I became a little bit of a fanboy of him. So that was a bold step, you know, and I think in his, you know, reluctance, he probably, you know, wanted to, you know, be transparent and demonstrate the heroism of these, you know, black soldiers, and succeeded in doing that. I mean, he sent troops to Little Rock. I mean, Eisenhower probably doesn't get enough credit, but, you know, it was after FDR that the troops got desegregated. It was Truman. So, you know, these men are politicians, right? So they have constituencies, and they're abiding by principles and actions that, you know, have, you know, require a commitment, maybe that goes against their own values sometimes. So I can't say. I think Eisenhower's a great leader.
We have time for one more question. I'll just ask one, and as we get to that one, talk a little, because you just reminded me about the importance of the black press in telling our story. Could you talk a little bit about, if you uncover just how important the black press was in not only telling the story about these soldiers, but just pushing the agenda broadly?
Black press is so instrumental in so many ways in actually getting that many recruits. You know, that Double V campaign that we talk about was real, and that they were like, look, go fight abroad, knowing that we have this fight back home, and this will help you do that. And, you know, they continue to be that voice within the black community, inspiring the civil rights movement. And, you know, if I really, you know, get my way, I get to tell the story of those 5 black journalists that were embedded in the various units and tell the World War II story through them and their eyes. Langston Hughes was among them, by the
wow.
way. Yeah.
Look at that. Well, last question. There's a microphone coming.
Just piggyback off that question about the black press, there's a great documentary by Stanley Nelson.
Yes.
Called Soldiers Without Swords.
That's
that
correct.
everyone should check out. But my question was, the lives of the men afterwards, what did they develop into? Because I was thinking of the title, Black Panthers, and I came to mind Robert Williams, who was the inspiration for the Black Panthers, his example of armed activism after getting out of the Army, where he was shunted aside to do ditch digging and telephone lines when he wanted to write. They told him he could write. But his experience after the Army led him to armed activism and self-defense, which later inspired the Black Panthers later on in the 60s. So my question is, the men afterward, how did they change after this? Did they become more involved in civil rights, become more involved in voter registration? Did they become more involved in things along those lines? Did the experience change them to fight harder for their freedoms afterwards?
You know, if you're talking about the men of the 761st in particular, I can't say. I mean, we talk a little bit about Medgar Evers, but in general, veterans become the catalyst for the civil rights movement. And they're not interested necessarily in taking up arms for revolution, but self-defense. It's a great story about veterans who band together and form this unit called the Deacons of Defense. And these are men that actually are at Selma and quietly at all these nonviolent civil disobedience demonstrations, just as backup in case things get dicey. So, you know, these men were trained, you know, and their presence often acted as a deterrent to violence when they were there. So, but a lot of the men and women who were, abroad fighting and part of the armed services became active in the civil rights movement and stayed active. Yeah.
And I would say one of the things, just to piggyback on that, I had the pleasure of getting to know, as I mentioned before, a number of Tuskegee Airmen, and one of them was Percy Sutton, who WBLS Apollo Theater, inner city broadcasting politician, Roscoe Brown, an academic, and I'll just tell you this quick story. I know it's your day, but I'll just tell you this quick story
No,
about
please
Roscoe,
do.
because I love Roscoe. Loved Roscoe. He was one of the first people I met in my career. And to be on I wound up sitting next to him on a flight to DC. And as the plane is taxiing, he's doing shadow controls of the plane.
Yeah.
And then sort of doing the shadow controls as the plane is taking off. And I said, "Do you always do that?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Man, it must have been cold up there." He said, "Damn cold."
Yeah. Yeah.
But they were amazing men with amazing stories, and the one of the amazing points that I took away, it was towards the end, which I think is a good way to end our conversation tonight, was the quote where it was said that they believed in each other.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing how tight they must have been, the camaraderie, the shared experience, and how that brought them forward. Thank you so much for telling their story.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.